the theory that we're working with is that, as I put at the top of the page, that man is a small world, the world is a large man, and what exists in this exists in this. And the assumption is that when Torah tells us about how Hashem created the world, it's not an attempt to tell us about physics or biology. Anyone looking, as I've said before, anyone looking for physics or biology or chemistry in the first chapter of Bereshit will come out extremely unsatisfied, as it doesn't go into too much detail. Rather, as Chazal tell us, there are certain messages and certain either philosophical or moral directives that it's trying to guide us towards. And my working theory is that if you look correctly, if you look deeply enough and into how Hashem created the world and how Hashem created the man, we might be able to pick up on a kind of a direction of how for us to create man, meaning how to, what are the stages, what are the developmental stages or focuses that we should have when approaching our children. Just like Hashem created man, we are creating, men, women, humans, and that's what we started to do. And I'll go back and say again. First, the most important thing about parenting, just like what makes a good parent, is the same thing that makes a good husband and a good wife, and that is what makes a good anything is being a good person. Period. It is the most cliche thing in the world, but all the tips in the world won't help if they're just tips. And now we're trying to take that rule, that concept, and kind of make it more specific. So we saw last week, we saw the first 3 days of creation. We saw on the first day of creation the emphasis, the repetitive word is O, and we saw that life, and then we saw life is, this repetitive O, and that the O is Tov, life is good, and that there's an emphasis on the fact that God is calling it good, is verbalizing that it is good, because it's not enough to know that something is good. It needs to be iterated and reiterated that you are good, you are good, you are good. Not only to know that your child is good and there's goodness in him and that everything starts from the fact that he is good, but to find opportunities and excuses to articulate it, to make sure that they know that they are good and that you see them as good no matter what. And then also comes, after you name it, also, O becomes Yom. Suddenly it's spreading. Okay? And that's the process we saw on the first day, last week. And then the second day, we come to free choice. So the first emphasis that starts from that life is good, and humans are good, and people are good. And the second stage is that there's free choice. We saw this in the fact that it says that Hashem was mavdil between Mayim and Mayim. The fact that two things that might look identical for all other intents and purposes, also over there a distinction is needed. It's not just a distinction between good and bad, like the first day. It's also a distinction between, good and good, possibly, or bad and bad. Just a mere fact that our children and we have free will. Something I did not say last week, and I'll say, and this goes especially for those for parents of teenagers, that has to do with free will. We all know to say that we believe in free will, but we don't always realize what it actually means. I'll sometimes have parents who come to me, and I've worked with a lot of teenagers and a lot of different backgrounds and different countries, and the issues are the same issues and the challenges are the same challenges. And one of the things that sometimes parents have come and told me is when the children have either gone off the derech in one way or another, or left their tradition, or have turned their backs on, again, whatever it is, their specific tradition or tradition in general, and they come and they ask either explicitly or otherwise saying, what did we do wrong? What should I have done differently? And one of the things I tell people has to do with understanding free will. And I say to them the following. If Avram Avinu could have an Ishmael, and Yitzchak Avinu can have an Esav, do we assume that Avram Avinu must have done something wrong just because Ishmael turned out to be a murderer? Do we just say, well, if Esav came out an Esav, does that mean that Yitzchak did something wrong necessarily? No, it is very possible. I would like to assume, I'd like to think that Avram Avinu did everything right. Well, because he's Avram Avinu. Not that he can't make mistakes. And Chazal do talk about some places where he maybe did make mistakes, but it doesn't, with Yaakov, yes, Yaakov, it's pretty obvious that there's some things that maybe he should have or could have done differently, and Chazal say it in one way or another. But Avram Avinu, why would we assume that he did something wrong? And even so, he had an Ishmael. And why is that? Because it's not all up to Avram. It's all up to us. At some point, our kids will come to the stage, it could be when they're, usually it's sometime in their teen years, where they're going to make a choice. It could be either one big choice, or it could be a lot of tiny little choices. And if we assume that, I must have done something wrong, that means that maybe we don't completely believe. They have free will. It is possible that you did everything right, and they still chose differently. Why? Because they have free will. And if we understand, going back to day 2, that will come a point in the life, or a lot of little points in life, where they will be making choices that will lead them to another choice. We need to teach them how to deal with choices. And this is what I talked about last week. Help them create a choice muscle, a choosing muscle. Create for them areas in their life where they can practice choosing between two options which are both safe, but they will believe in their own ability to make decisions for themselves. And also, if they're making choices in an area that isn't necessarily so safe, also make sure they feel that they can make choices, and that you trust their ability to make choices, and that, especially when they're still young, to talk to them about the choices that they've made. Why did you choose this? And to offer them choices on things that are meaningless, just for them to realize, I have choice, and sometimes I need to make a choice.
Exercise the choice muscle.
Exercise the choice muscle. So we brought some examples, and I won't repeat them. I will repeat them. It could be anything from how to spend your money, to doing your homework first, or doing something else first, and have them see the consequence and learn that they have control over their choices, and that there's consequence to their choices. And what games to play, what friends to have over, things which are not that big of a deal, but just for them to get used to making choices and seeing the consequence, and learning for themselves that their choices have consequences, and to practice thinking like that. So first day was about goodness, enhancing the goodness in them, and we brought a few examples. Second day is about free will and believing in their free will, and therefore preparing them for that day, or a lot of days where they'll be making big choices. How am I going to prepare my son and my daughter to make what I believe to be good choices? What do I need to do with them right now? So when they get to that, it's like an army. What practices and what training do I want to put them through now, so when they come to the real world, when they're old enough to make choices on their own, will they be equipped to make a good choice? And among other things, it's about letting them practice choice and seeing the consequences of their choices, and not choosing everything for them. Okay, this is just a recap of last week, or just a small expansion, because 2/3 of the people in the room weren't here last week. So
unfortunately, we scheduled a board meeting.
So no, it's okay. It's worth it. It's worth it. The third day, let's see. The third day was very interesting, which is we said the distinction between or the separation between water and land, and over there is making sure we have an area which is maybe. Yes, there's always going to be an area which is a little chaotic. That's the area of choice of the second day. But in the third day, there's also an area which is stable, where there is no choice, where things are concrete, where things are stable. There are rules. Meaning stage 3 is rules. Stage 1 is goodness. Stage 2 is choice, free will, and stage 3 is rules, because that's the distinction between land and water, stability versus chaos. Completely dynamic versus not changing or barely changing. And we see that only when there's land, suddenly things are growing. So we mentioned, no, I won't repeat everything, we're just saying the importance of rules and making rules that are actually achievable, attainable. No is a no, a yes is a yes. The default assumption is only say no meaning my personal approach is always say yes unless there's an actual reason to say no, and in our own laziness is very rarely a good enough excuse to say no. Not never, just rarely. And a yes is a yes and a no is a no, because that gives it absolute stability in those areas where there are the rules, and that's paramount. Okay, we said parenthetically that we will get later on in the series to talk about discipline as a separate thing, and Chazal's different approaches within Chazal to discipline, but that has to do with day 3 as well, but we're going to get to that later on. Okay, so we've now recapped very quickly what we saw last week. And now we're on day 4. Let me see, where's my day 4? Okay, I may have lost my day 4. Okay, oh, here it is. Okay, day 4 is really, I find to be really, really fascinating. So we have goodness, with all things we said about that before, last week, free choice, the power of choices, and rules. And now we come to day 4. We're gonna read it, and we're gonna try to understand what this stage is. ויאמר אלוהים יהי מאורות ברכי השמיים להבדיל בין היום ובין הלילה והיו לאותות ולמועדים ולימים ושנים. So Hashem said there shall be, I don't know what it's, I think it's translated as luminuses or something like that. Luminant bodies. ברכי השמיים להבדיל, to separate, to distinguish, to differentiate between the day and the night. What is the obvious question? Because when we're doing the text, we're asking questions and we're answering it with our educational approaches. What is the obvious difficulty about this? That we need these luminous bodies to distinguish between the day and the night. Considering what we've seen in the Perek already. Let's look back at day 1. Look back at day 1. Right? Pasuk Hey, Vayikra Elohim la'or yom v'lachoshech karan layla. So what's the obvious question? What?
Maybe to teach them to differentiate between good and evil.
Wait, no. First of all, it's before that.
We've already made that distinction.
We've already made that distinction. We'll get there. We'll get there.
So why do we need those lights?
Why do we need those lights? On day 1, you're already saying that Hashem has made a distinction between day and night, right? We said, right? Let's look at it, right? And Pasuk Hey. Vayikra Elohim la'or yom. Hashem called the light day, and to the darkness He called night. So on day 1 already, there's a distinction between day and night. So why, on the 4th day, do you come and say, oh, and Hashem made the sun and the moon to make a distinction between night and day? It's a good question, no? I mean, I never noticed it until I was preparing this class, and I was saying, let's try to look at this chapter from scratch. I said, I don't understand what's going on. Let's continue reading.
Seems like it's overkill.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complete repetition.
Duplication.
Yeah. והיו למאורות ברכי השמיים להאיר על הארץ ויחנן. They became bodies of light to put light or to give light to earth, and it was so. ויעש אלוקים את שתי המאורות הגדולים, and Hashem made the 2 large bodies of light. את המאור הגדול לממשלת היום, ואת המאור הקטון לממשלת הלילה ואת הכוכבים. So he made the large luminescent, I guess, לממשלת. That word means control, means it's like the word memshala in modern Hebrew is like the government. The memshala is like shilton, it's to have power over something. Okay, that's what the word means. So he made the large, when he made the sun to have power over the day, to control the day, and he made the small luminescent, meaning the moon, to control and to have power over the night, and he made the stars. And Hashem put them in the heavens, in order to shine upon the earth. Why is that important? Meaning, he says, okay, we know, once you tell us He made the sun and the moon, I know where they are. What do you have to say? He put them in the heaven to shine on the earth. It goes again, and to rule, so to say, over the day and the night. Leavdil ben or ben achoshech, in order to differentiate between the night, between the light and the darkness. Vayar Elokim Kitav, and Hashem saw it was good. So the two questions that I have is, one, we said, why do we need another way to differentiate between day and night if it already exists in day one? And the second is, why does this phrase of that God put the sun and the moon in the heavens to shine on the earth? Those are the two questions. Again, from a text perspective, any possible answers?
Well, I don't know, but it also seems like it's repeated like a number of times, because it says in Tet Zayin that Lemem Shalat Hayom Vetamar Katan Lemem Shalat Halayla, and then again he says the same thing in Yud Chet. Yeah, and then he says the same thing again. It says the same thing again in Yud Chet. So it's
right.
almost like.
So yes, it seems very superfluous. Now I don't have all the answers, but just even the questions are just posing the questions are always good. And so I'm going to take it, and we're trying to read the chapter and look for answers through the educational eyes. So that's what we're doing. So for some reason, it seems that the differentiation that was presented on the first day isn't enough. Meaning, it sounds like that was good to a certain point, but then comes a stage where additional tools are needed, additional vessels are needed in order to make this the same distinction. Meaning, in the beginning, it told us there is good and there's bad. Okay, and now it's saying, but it's not just, at some point you're going to need two elements, two things that are external a little bit, that are a little bit removed, right? They're up in the heavens and it emphasizes that the sun and the moon were put in the heavens to shine upon the earth. So it's two things which are a little bit removed. They're not in the world, okay? Rather, this is they're a little bit more removed, and these are two things which will help us, or help our children possibly, we'll get to it in a second, to make the distinction between night and day, between good and bad.
The parents.
What?
The parents.
The parents of the sun and the moon. No, I don't think they are. I don't think, because then, careful, because I'm going to ask you which one is the sun, which one is the moon, and we don't want to we don't want to go there. We don't want to go there. So,
I might want to hear it.
What? What?
I might not want to hear the answer.
You might not. I think that this could be talking about, especially when talking about on a developmental level. I think this, if we talk about the two tools that we use, or that we need to teach our children to use to differentiate between good and bad, and I think about the big vessel and the little one, I would say that this is their mind and their heart. Meaning two tools which we use to look at things and to tell the difference between things, and to relate to things as being good and as being bad. And this is a really, really, I should say, logic versus emotion, logic versus instinct, and this is a big one. And I'll give you an example. So most people, and I'll give examples both from when kids are young and when kids are older and teenagers. Most people allow their kids, myself included, regretfully, allow my kids to watch Disney movies. Okay, Disney movies, Pixar movies, whatever, all that stuff. And usually in all these movies, there's a bad guy, there's a villain or villains. Excuse me. And at some point in the movie, it starts off nice, and then the villain is revealed, and the plan looks like it's going to work. And at the end of the movie, it all works out, and they all live happily ever after. So I find I have my kids are 9, 7, and 4. And I find that all of them, especially the younger ones, when it gets to the bad part, they like to hide away. They don't want to watch. They leave the room and want to come in. And you tell them, "Don't worry, it ends up okay." Or you've seen this movie already. You know that it ends up okay. It makes zero difference to the kid. Okay? Why does a younger kid, why does he want to read the same book 100 times till it drives us mad. He watches every single night the same book. We have 300 books, but we never read more than the same 5, right? More or less. Why is it? He knows that it's not, especially when they're younger, we'll talk about teenagers in a minute, it's not in the intellect. They're not reading the book because they want to see what happens, like we do. We read a book, we get to the end, we finish it, we don't read it again. Maybe in 5 years, we'll read it again because we enjoyed it and we want to remember all the details again. With a kid, it's not about the logic of it. When he is reading that book, or when you're reading the book to him, he's experiencing something. And he wants to read it again. It's not because he forgot how it ends up. He wants to experience it again. When the kid is watching that movie, it makes zero difference that at the end, that in 30 minutes, it's all going to turn happily ever after. Right now, for him, he lives his experiences, his emotions. They play a much, much bigger role for him than his intellect. We as adults, our intellect usually, hopefully, this is the direction that we want to, our intellect, our logic, our thought, our brains, they control our behavior and our attitude far, far more than our emotions. We know that our emotions are fickle. We know that emotions change. We know that emotions are subject to a lot of different things, and we try to conduct our lives based on our logic and our intellect. And our intellect sometimes have to control what we feel, and to sometimes push off what we feel, sometimes too much. Okay, but kids, especially younger ones, do not have that ability. They are very intuitive. They are very instinctive. And they do not have that control over their emotions. And there's something very good about that. When a kid is sad, a small kid, what does he do? He cries. And when he's happy, he laughs. We don't do that. When we're sad, we're embarrassed of crying. Or we try to hold it in as if there's something wrong with it. There's something very healthy about the life of a child that does not have those inhibitions. But that also means that when it comes to when they feel like doing something that they know is bad, the fact that they know it's bad means very little, because for them, the emotion is what dictates, and their instinct is much, much more powerful. So, for instance, keeping in line with last week when I try to do, don't say this, rather say this. So I would advise against saying things like to younger kids, why did you do that? We all say it. Why did you do that? The true answer is always, the kid will never say this, but the true answer is, because I'm a kid. That's why I did, because I felt like doing it. And that's what I do. I do what I feel like doing, especially when you're talking about younger ages. And it changes just, depending on the kid, what stage he's at, but don't say why did you, you're not going to get a good answer. So I advise not using language like, why did you do that? Rather, how are you going to not do this? Did you forget that this is bad? Or do you know why I'm upset? Why am I upset? And going back to what we talked about on the first day of reinforcing good, you're not supposed to do that. What happened right beforehand? Or how is this not going to happen again? Or how are you going to fix this? In which you're reinforcing good again. Or like, why was this wrong? In which place, where you're replacing the accusatory thing with, now you're having you're now analyzing it. Now, I know it sounds very easy when we're sitting here in the room to talk about, whereas in the moment we're very upset and we're venting, but that goes back to what I said, a good parent is, first of all, a good person who himself controls their emotions and tries to keep it at bay and be more. I used to have a rabbi who would give classes about education, and he said that one of the most important rules in their house, and I can't say that I follow this all the time, not at all, is that never to punish when you're angry. Never. We all know that we say things when we're angry we afterwards regret. And when it comes to our kids, it's so much more important, because remember how, especially when they're younger, how deeply they're affected by by emotions, and how susceptible their character is to what they're feeling at that moment. To try very, very, very hard not to punish. I don't like using the word consequences. I don't like it. Not to punish, or not to discuss the issue with the child when you're upset. Of course, it's not always possible. But it is important because it plays into this exact thing, not only with our kids, also with ourselves. With younger kids especially, that they act a lot more on instinct, specifically with what they are feeling at the moment. It is the stronger element in what drives their behavior. And to be aware of that and to realize that sometimes their emotions are much stronger than them. And with teenagers, it is true as well. Okay? So yes, they do have more control over their emotions, but they do not have as much control about their hormones. And that there are certain things that are stronger than them at this point in their life. Now, teenagers, on the one hand, are easier to deal with because they do, their intellectual powers and their control over their emotions is stronger. You can have, theoretically, a conversation with them, an intellectual discussion with them. If you're very lucky to have that kind of relationship, or blessed to have a teenager who says more than to you, but also over there. Without going into too much specifics or specific ages, that things, meaning they are not miniatures of us. Meaning we are at there's a reason why Torah only makes a child obligated to a fully disciplined life at the age of 12 and 13. And there's a reason why Chazal say that a Jewish person, man or woman, is not actually what's called bar unshin, held fully responsible for punishments to the age of 20. Okay, to the age of 20, because we understand that even though yes, you do have free will, children and adolescents' free will is severely handicapped. They're severely handicapped when it comes to certain things. With children, it's impulse control. They're severely handicapped with impulse control. It doesn't mean that we don't expect them to behave differently. It just means that, anger is not the response. It won't achieve it. You need to find a way to help them develop into recognizing that they lost control here, or that they can think about it and analyze it and talk about it and plan towards it in order to try to keep their emotions at bay, or to not have it take control of them. What they're going to do the moment before it happens. What are the triggers that they should be looking for? What are me and one of my sons, we have a safe word. That when I see that when my kid is, and now don't think for a second on the perfect way. It doesn't always work. Probably half the time it doesn't work. But I have one of my kids who on Shabbat is off his pill, and it's difficult for him, but difficult for him to keep himself in line. And we have every Shabbat we come up with a different word. That if I see that he's losing focus and he's losing control and he's doing things that he shouldn't be doing, that I will say that word, and that word will be the thing that will cause him to stop and to focus. Now, does it always work? Absolutely not. But he's familiar with the concept, and he'll say to me, and sometimes we'll say, okay, which word should it be? Should it be this word or this word? And we play around with which funny word it will be. And he's getting into his mind that there's something that he could or should try to do in order to control himself. Even if it doesn't work half the time, that's fine. But he's getting used to that idea. Both with children with impulse control, and teenagers with hormones. Not only, but there's other things. They also, when it comes to questions of, teenagers are much more susceptible to depression and, in extreme cases, things like eating disorders that have to do with self-image. But a lot of it has to do with hormones, but also with other things as well. But recognizing that there are things that they are severely handicapped when it comes to logically coming to conclusions and controlling their behavior and their emotions.
It's also interesting because you talked about the heart and the mind and sort of the logic and the emotion. And I found that with my boys, when they reached a certain stage, they really focused much more. They didn't want to be emotional. Whatever argument we had was always, I'm going to Now I'm going to take all the emotion out of it and I'm going to just discuss it with you from a logic perspective. Now, if you really analyze the logic that was there, I would say that there certainly
dubious, questionable
logical steps. My 3 older ones are boys, and now I have a teenage daughter. And like, you say heart and mind, well, the emotions are definitely much like that's the primary modus operandi. She doesn't even talk about, well, logically I'm going to do this. And whereas my boys would be, I don't want to discuss, Mom, you're just going to get emotional. We have to talk logically. I'm not sure necessarily that it's really there, but this is certainly something that resonates more.
Right.
That side seems to resonate with.
So it's interesting that you mentioned
with
that.
My boys and with my daughter, something a little bit different.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned that. So Chazal say it's one of the most incorrectly understood quotes from Chazal about women. So there's a phrase that talks about very famous quote from Chazal that talks about women. It says about women, Nashim datan kala. Datan kala. Okay? So people completely misunderstand.
A lot of women are not supposed to learn Gemara
right.
because they were.
So people think that means that they are weak, meaning they have weak logic or weak intellect. That is not what it means. The best way I like to explain this is, meaning literally kala means light. It is lighter. It doesn't mean that there's less of it. Imagine that you have scales, okay, like old-fashioned scales, okay, and there's logic or there's intellect, not logic, intellect and emotion. Every single person on earth has both of those elements, as well as many others, but those are 2 that we like to use, intellect and emotion. And those 2 things play, in one way or another, they play a role in the decisions that we make. Sometimes I understand that this might be better, but it doesn't feel right. There's nothing wrong with the phrasing like that. Sometimes when we think about ourselves, we give other people advice. So, well, why does this feel right? We say go. Sometimes we say go with your heart, and sometimes that is turns out to be the right decision. But a lot of things. So, to which one? We all know people who are more go more after the heart, wear their heart on their sleeve, as we like to say, and that is the more dominant thing in how they approach the world and how they make decisions, how they feel about the thing intuitively, versus people who are a lot more intellectually driven, and that is the main tool they use in order to make their decisions. So Nashim Datan Kala means that as in a broad stroke, it of course doesn't. There could obviously be exceptions, but if you, as a category, men versus women, that women, when it comes to those 2 scales, when it comes to those 2 elements, that which one wins out, which one plays a larger role, which one is heavier, emotion or intellect. So the Gemara is saying Nashim Datan Kala, that their intellect is lighter in the equation of how they make decisions, which is what you just described to me reminds me of. Now I don't want to open up the whole thing because today it is not politically correct to come and say that there's inherent qualities to men and women, but this is an explanation which I find to be not only much more easy to digest, but also I think very accurate and not problematic in any way, shape, or form, but at least in my eyes. But because we all have both of these elements that play into our decision making, and we all know men who that are more emotional about the decisions. We all know women who but as a category, that's the way to understand it. Close parentheses. But if we're already talking about that, then it's important to realize that maybe our boys are like this and our girls are like this, or each single one of our children is an individual, and to see. But as a general rule, that there is, besides the just fundamental concept of free choice, which exists in day 2, or that there is good versus evil, good and bad, which is day 1, and that we have free will, and we need to enhance free will, which is day 2, comes day 4 and says, listen, you have 2 main tools to help you do this, or to help your children do this correctly, and that is the large body of light and the smaller body of light, which are a little external to life itself. We can talk about them as separate, intellect and emotion, and to realize that these are tools we need to teach our children how to use to make decisions, and how they play, how they correlate to each other, and how they interact. But to realize that our children and our teenagers are somewhat handicapped when it comes to telling the difference between the big one and the little one, and how to use them. And we need to find ways through conversation and through our responses to help them use them correctly. And I like to use practical examples, so I just brought as an example, asking a young child, why did you do that? That's a question you ask an adult, because we assume that there's a rational decision driving your decision. There's a rational thought and process driving your decision that was thought out. Kids don't. They just act intuitively, as do teenagers, especially when it comes to certain things. So that would be day 4. And our time is up. So next week, we will continue with day 5, and then day 6, which is really, really, I find the most interesting one, because in day 6, man is created. So when we look at the process of how man himself was created, I'll just throw this out there already now, how suddenly in 2 different psukim in day 6, Hashem suddenly is not acting on his own. The famous thing where he says Naaseh Adam, he's speaking in plural. And there's a lot of different discussions of who God could possibly be speaking to, but we're going to look at it from a different perspective. Why would it be from, if we're correct, or if we're trying to read this whole parak through the eyes of education, and this is a formula or a roadmap of how to raise children, then what could it possibly mean? I think it's an easy guess, but that suddenly God is not doing it on his own anymore, rather is doing it in cooperation, or is taking advice from someone, or is looking for a partner. Let's make. So we'll talk about that, and I think there's an obvious answer, but even though it's obvious, there's a lot that can be developed there. So we'll talk about that next week.